I could probably talk over an hour about all the changes that are currently happening. That's not possible, and I've spent considerable time on behalf of notified bodies in Brussels over the last 2 years on discussion of what is going to change. I think it's clear for everybody that is in this field that there's going to be quite a lot of change. I will try to highlight a few items from the perspective of notified bodies, benannte Stellen, which are important for notified bodies in relation to what that means for manufacturers. I will skim through the first part of my slides on some of the key changes in EU regulations. As indicated, only a few items I will touch on, otherwise it becomes too much. Then where are we today? You know, what's happening at the moment? It's relatively quiet at the moment compared to the activities last year in the legislative process. But there is progress, and then spend some time on, what does this mean for manufacturers, today, and let's say over the next 2 years. One caution, saying, the regulations have not been finalized. We know the contours, what's going to happen. There's been a lot of discussion, as I'm sure most of you are aware, but not all the details are finalized. There's some controversial items which still require a lot of debate. So anything said here may still be changed. Just in short, the medical device regulation will replace the active implantable medical device directive and the medical device directive and some smaller legislative instruments. Just if you look at the text already, there's a lot more words. It's 10 chapters. Compared to the current medical device directive, there's much more detail and content in there. I think most people in this sector, know the background, and I think already from the start of the medical device directives, but certainly early 2000, there's been discussion about a level playing field for manufacturers, differences between notified bodies, differences between competent authorities, borderline product discussions. Is this a medical device considered in one country but not in another country? So there's always been criticism almost since the start on some of the weak aspects of the current legislative system, which has accumulated in 2008 when the European Commission started with a document that's to start a discussion on the so-called recast that hit like a bomb and created a lot of discussion right away, where everybody felt like this is going toward pharma legislation and medical devices are not ready for that. And then 2010, 2011, the PIP scandal emerged. And that aggravated and increased a lot of activity. Of what I'll focus on this morning, a key number of weak areas which clearly come out is that from a point of view of the competent authorities, the market surveillance, so post approval, has weak areas because competent authorities across Europe are different in size, different in experience. Most of them have undercapacity, so market surveillance is mostly reactive rather than proactive. But also creating one big database, coordination, learning from each other. That's a whole weak area. With the PIP scandal, the topic of unannounced visits came up. Notified bodies have always had the opportunity to come in and do audits unannounced, but in reality that never happened, or almost never. And the oversight of notified bodies has been a big topic. There's been a lot of criticism on notified bodies, saying being weak, lack of competence, big differences in approach, and the area of clinical evaluation. So those are some of the key areas which I'll focus on and which have been addressed in the new regulation. In terms of structure, if you read the new document, the proposal from the European Commission, obviously there's some scope elements, an area which much more definition around what's called now economic operators, so not just manufacturers and authorized representatives, but also distributors, importers, and what their respective roles are. The topic of reprocessing, which is one of the debates still ongoing. Then an area which is also has historically been a weak area of traceability, particularly obviously for implants. A European-wide database, I know here in Germany, I think is the only country where for many years with the DIMD database there's been a lot of effort already put in place. And Germany in that sense is much further ahead than most countries. But since the start there's been discussion on the EU database, but hopefully now there's some progress, including the introduction of UDI. Well, notified bodies, like I said, critical area that needs improvement. Then on conformity assessments, not so much, apart from scrutiny process, which I'll comment in a minute, and then certainly the area of clinical evidence in general, historically been weak, much focus, and then the rest in governance really, is there more a central role for the European Union and subcommittees to steer more on a European level versus, the authority of member states. I'll pick just a few highlights from that. Scope extension, not a big difference, like non-viable animal tissue involved. Also now non-viable human tissue would be inclusive. And a long-standing discussion, cosmetic implants would also become part of the new legislation. And then the recent debate, the European Parliament in its review of the draft of the Commission has been entering the proposal on reprocessing, saying by default single-use devices would be reprocessed unless it can be justified, scientifically supported that single use is really needed from a safety perspective. I'm not sure where that stands. I don't think most of the authorities from what we've discussed as notified bodies are behind this, so this should be resolved later. But this is nothing that notified bodies deal with, so I won't talk about that further in detail. An interesting area has not had much discussion, but could have some impact. Over the last few years, there's been, between member states and in Brussels, a lot of discussion around to what extent the standards that we're all using are harmonized on a European level. ISO 13485 has been debated, saying Sweden initiated that, saying that should not be a European harmonized standard because not all the essential requirements are being addressed through that standard. The same for commonly, one of the broad horizontal standards, ISO 14971 on risk management, that should not be harmonized. So there's been a lot of debate, 601 for electrical testing, that some of these standards, which in fact are European harmonized at the moment, should not fully support all the essential requirements in Europe and hence cannot be harmonized standards. And in the new legislation, the concept of common technical specifications is being introduced from the IVD area, where for List A devices this is common practice. And this would be an instrument where the European Commission itself, outside the normal process in which standards are being developed, as a compromise between all kinds of stakeholders, industry, scientific experts, etc., authorities, that the authorities or the European Commission itself can formulate requirements on a technical level, but also on a clinical level for specific devices that it deems necessary. And that would be, in the future, potentially a powerful instrument for the authorities, for the European Commission, to drive technical content and set requirements itself. I'll skip this one for sake of time. Note for the bodies, like I said, there's much more scrutiny, and I'll touch on that in a minute, which also I think is impacting manufacturers today. The principles are the same. There's just been added because of the amendments last year, October, from the European Parliament, that now special note for bodies could be introduced. And again, this is still, as far as I know, debated between the member states that are discussing this at the moment and the European Parliament. There's not full agreement on this, but the European Parliament has entered this concept of special note for bodies. And the tricky point is, well, those would be the only ones to be handling class 3 devices and implants. The controversy is around that the way it's written now is that the European Medicines Agency in London would have a role in designating those notified bodies. And then the fear comes up again that pharma-based legislation would be the basis for designating those notified bodies. But it's in there now, which would mean that those notified bodies, you can be a normal notified body, but then if you want to do class 3 as well, you should make an application to EMEA, and your designation would be reviewed together with, well, like here in Germany, ZLG, to grant a notified body its designation to do class 3. In general, what's in there and what it means for notified bodies is much more focus on internal competence, which as notified bodies we feel is good. That has been the detail of that has been lacking. Much more own in-house technical expertise and medical expertise. External experts are being often used by notified bodies and can continue to be used as long as a notified body in the future will have sufficient in-house expertise for product areas based on NBOC. So the scope that a notified body would be allowed to certify against would have to be more in line with the in-house expertise available. There's been the business model. This influences a lot the business model of a lot of notified bodies, of which there's been quite a few smaller ones which had a few people in-house and all their expertise exported or outsourced. Then the other element that comes in which is in the Commission proposal already, is a special scrutiny process for class 3 devices, which has also been a lot of debate and which has not finished. But basically saying the notified body handles class 3 submissions, maybe special notified body in the future or maybe normal. But once they start that process of reviewing class 3 submission, they would notify the European Commission and its committees in between, and the Commission may then pick that submission to do a scrutinized review on top. And I won't go into the details of timelines, what it means, but obviously there's a concern in industry that there would be like a double process for some devices, which would delay time to market. And this would be the detail, of steps, of timing, of response from the medical device coordination group back to the notified body and questions and response to that. But basically it would mean that the process, if those devices would be selected, would be much longer. I think, just to clarify what's going to happen, the principle, once this new regulation is in place, whenever that is, all notified bodies that are currently designated under the existing directive, they will, at the end of the transition period, 3 years, lose their designation, which means under the new regulation they will need to apply to become a notified body again. So they will be audited, like an initial audit, have to achieve their designation, which means something for certificates currently in the market. Eventually it means that the current certificates will expire, and only these new notified bodies that have achieved these a new designation under the new regulation will be able to issue new certificates. Again, there's a transition period for which this happens, so it's certainly not overnight, but it's important to understand the principle that notified bodies will need redesignation again. Clinical, there's lots said about that as well, but it's clear that everybody feels this has been a weak area. So at the moment, notified bodies are scrutinized in their audits by competent authorities much more on do they have the internal competence to assess clinical evaluations? Do they sufficiently hire on a project basis external clinicians as part of the review? How robust are clinical evaluations reviewed? So this means for manufacturers, this will be looked at much more closely, well, starting today basically, than ever before. So I think in principle, and I have to say, I just joined a consulting group, and I've seen in 2 months now already more than when I was at the notified body the last 20 years, on the status of the real status of clinical evaluations. And there's some good ones, but there's also manufacturers that still have some work to do. And I think, where it all leads to the balance between, what clinical data do you need to have pre-approval, pre-certification, and what can you do post-certification through a post-marketed clinical follow-up plan, but also the continuous circle of getting market feedback from post-market surveillance, from clinical follow-up, how to feed that back into the design cycle in risk management plans. So risk management being central, clinical evaluations being reviewed by notified bodies in the future much, much stronger. And I think the importance of post-market clinical follow-up as an instrument to balance and to ensure that not everything has to be done pre-certification becomes a powerful tool that's not been often used yet up till now, and will gain importance. Then where does it stand today? Roughly this is the process. On the left, the European Commission has, in September 2012, issued a draft proposal. The Parliament has started to review that and made amendments. That was done in a vote in October last year, and formally on the 2nd of April this year, before the old Parliament stopped, this has been formalized into a so-called first reading by the Parliament. So they've made their amendments to the proposal of the Commission. At this moment, the Member States, together in the Council, are debating. And in each country, I've been involved with ZLG, with MHRA in the UK. They're inviting stakeholders, industry and notified bodies to comment and prepare themselves. And they have regular meetings, currently under the Greek presidency, to come up with their opinion. And certainly on notified bodies, these special notified bodies, the scrutiny process, the reprocessing, there's still a lot of debate. But there's very little that comes out, also for us at the moment. And if the outcome, and they can agree with the new European Parliament, I've heard everything in terms of, will the new regulation then kick in place in early 2015, or the Netherlands presidency starts in the first half of 2016, and they are sort of preparing themselves already, if it takes until early 2016. So nobody knows. If they can't reach agreement, there will be a second reading by the European Parliament, and then hopefully a resolution. So roughly that is a timeline, and then there's a transition period for the MDD of 3 years. That's not debated from the moment that the legislation comes in force. Currently also for the IVD directive, but there's debate there that it might be wiser to go to 5 years transition. So if you look at the timeline, we could say, we could relax. And if you look how slow things move in Brussels, you could say, yes, we can relax. But that's not totally the case, because if you look at what happens in reality, things are being taken seriously really since the PIP incident. As Notified Bodies, we also, when this recast process started in 2010, I started a code of conduct for notified bodies, bringing the TÜVs and GMAT and a few others together, the larger notified bodies, BSI, to say, we need to regain confidence of the whole sector, and what can we do ourselves as notified bodies. So those initiatives were taken, but also the member states were afraid that the Commission will take all power and authority under the new regulation, and have started to step up and coordinate and join forces much more, which has led in September last year, that probably everybody's aware, in 2 recommendations from the European Commission ahead of the regulation to address some of the concern areas, the designation of notified bodies, to take that on much stronger, and on the other side, rules for the conformity assessment. So how do notified bodies review files? How do they audit? But also the unannounced audits. Just 2 weeks ago, there's been a report from the Commission with some evaluation, and there's been quite a lot happening, which is impacting our world today. The code of conduct for notified bodies is now enforced in the branch organization Team and B of notified bodies, of which there's 30 notified bodies member, and it's a mandatory part of membership, which focuses on aligning assessments in terms of days, internal competence that notified bodies need, competence in certification decisions, kind of a practical guide to harmonize between notified bodies, and it's being enforced while we're doing audits among each other to enforce it with independent auditors. The recommendation from the Commission on a designation, even before that, a joint audit program started. I hosted the first one as head of notified body of BSI Germany last year in February, which was done by ZLG, and 2 other authorities were joining, the Danish and the Dutch, and the European Commission. So we had 7 people in-house for an audit we'd never had in terms of severity. And this has led, since that start, in February there was one in the UK and we had the first one in Germany. But since then, there's in 23 countries in Europe have notified bodies. In 22 of those countries, these joint audits took place. And roughly some 15 notified bodies were either forced to stop, scopes have been reduced, they stopped themselves when the announcement came of we're going in for an unannounced audit. So as BSI, and I think many notified bodies have had the issue already of in bulk manufacturers coming to us saying, we've lost our notified body, I need another one, can you take over? So it's starting to have impact already. The unannounced audits, of course, I'm sure everybody's heard and discussed that a lot, but that's being introduced with this recommendation. All notified bodies, from what I hear, here in Germany, all over, are all preparing themselves and slowly are starting now in this year with doing unannounced audits. But also things like all notified bodies will be forced once every 3 years to rotate auditors, which also will have impact, certainly cost-wise. But if you look at the recent report, what has happened, the redesignation has also started of new notified bodies. 5 took place since April. Out of those 5 resulted 1 in stopping as a notified body. So the areas that authorities look at, and hence notified bodies are look at much sharper, are the clinical evaluation, much stronger, the sampling of technical files, which in many cases did not happen enough. So the whole technical files and the design dossiers for Class 3, the clinical evaluation reports, they have to be much, much more robuster. In the area of market surveillance by competent authorities, there's less happened over the last few years. I think mainly lack of resources at most competent authorities. But in terms of coordination between them, a lot has happened. They have monthly calls. Notified bodies get Kun requests, so to speak, challenged on specific devices that they certified. So finally, what does this mean? I think manufacturers need to ask themselves, look at, is my notified body ready for this new regime? Do I still have a notified body in a few years from now? Look at the quality of technical files. They will be sampled more rigorously. On Class 3, specifically look at clinical evaluation reports and the whole circle with post-market follow-up and risk management. And the audit burden will increase, not only through unannounced audits, but also because of the rotation. If you've had a local auditor within your vicinity, and that's been there 10 years, that will not continue. So, in conclusion, there's a lot happening now already that everybody starts to feel ahead of the new regulation. And the direction is clear. So I think we all should take this seriously to be in control and to stay in control. Thank you.